Good morning, everybody. I'm say salam, namaste to everybody. Good morning, and good evening. The people who are joining from Nepal, Bangladesh, India, who are here, and also Pakistan, I can see, and hopefully one or two folks from Sri Lanka as well. So here we have our guest for the fourth Feed the Mind. As you got our invitation about Dr. Priya Shyamsundar is our guest speaker today. So let me introduce Dr. Priya Shyamsundar to you. She is the lead economist at the Nature Conservancy, and with extensive experience on the economics of environment and development. Priya's research covers a range of local to global, urban, and rural environmental problems. At Nature Conservancy, she leads a global science program on the economics of conservation that focuses on valuing green infrastructure, evaluating economic and social outcomes, identifying economic instruments, and assessing behavioral nudges that may motivate environmental actions. Previously, Priya was founder director of SANDY, a research network that helps examine and identify solutions to shared environment development challenges across 7 countries in South Asia. Priya has served on advisory committees associated with the Government of India, the World Bank, and the International Geosphere Biosphere Program. She has also consulted extensively for the World Bank, most recently working with the program on forest to develop a comprehensive framework on forest and poverty. Priya currently serves as member Sandy's steering committee in Nepal, and she's a fellow of Institute on the Environment, University of Minnesota, USA. She's a member advisory board of the journal Ecology, Economy, and Society, hosted in India, and international vice chair, board, International Institute of Sustainable Development, Canada. Priya received her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, Economics, and English in Mount Carmel College, Karnataka in India, Master of Arts in Economics from Delhi University, and PhD in Environmental Economics, Duke University. So, Priya, good to have you here with us. And we'd love to maybe start with, how you got interested, say, in economics and also especially environmental economics, because we can see that you got your PhD specializing in environmental economics, then you went for environmental development economics field and serving, the director for the SANDY for a long time, and also World Bank, and now with the Nature Conservancy, with all those environmental conservation efforts, valuation of ecosystems. So we are just curious to know how it all started.
Thank you, Sakib, and good morning, everybody. I just want to say that when you pop up with your questions, be sure to come on the screen, introduce yourselves, and tell me who you are so I can address you appropriately, okay? So my origin story, Sakib, you want to know my origin story? So I think I was maybe 22, and on my first job, which was with the Institute of Social Studies in Bangalore, it was run by this woman, Devaki Jain, who was quite a fiery sort of a labor economist. And she was possibly the first person who advocated for women's labor to be included in, sort of all the data collection activities that the National Statistical Systems Ministry, I think the Planning and Ministry of Planning and Implementation is what it's called, which collects all the data for the national income accounts. So she advocated for including women's work and women's labor, even if it was not monetized, into the national system and income accounts. So anyway, I was on my first job with her, and part of this was to try and understand women's work. And as part of this effort, we were sent off. I was an RA, sent off to look at a particular part of the Western Ghats, which run up and down the Deccan Plateau in India, to understand women's collection of non-timber forest products. They were collecting a particular fruit called uppagi, Garcinia cambogia, that's the tree. And uppagi is like tamarind, it's a condiment. So people, particularly in Kerala, were using uppagi for marinating fish. So it was quite popular. Right. And these women would collect it seasonally and then they would sell it. And, rural women, this was their only source of cash income. And was a very significant source of overall income, but cash, the only source of cash. So they were doing okay with this. And then uppagi got really popular, and the sort of the market opened for uppagi. So people in Kerala realized that they wanted more of it. The market grew, and people wanted to buy it in large quantities. And the government, recognizing that there was this huge demand for uppagi, decided to auction it. So they changed the institution. It was an informal collection activity, and the government stepped in and said, this is state land. Of course, we will now auction uppagi. And the minute the institution changed, there were people from Kerala who came in and bought the rights to collect uppagi. Women were out, men were in, and between today and tomorrow, one institutional change, and the women in this region lost about a third of their income. So that was really eye-opening for me, sort of this connection. And then there were all these concerns about, when you collect it for the market, is it going to be sustainable? Obviously, there's not enough monitoring going on to make sure that the amount that they've auctioned is actually collected. And so there's all these sustainability questions associated with it. So this really, I was this 22-year-old and thinking about this, growing up in urban India, but aware of rural issues, like, how does this happen? There's this confluence of sort of gender, income, poverty, markets, natural resource management, and institutions. And I was fascinated by how one change in an institution could then change the entire makeup of both who wins and who loses, right. And also what happens to the resource itself and how it's managed. So that's how I started thinking about it, and realized that I maybe should get a degree that would allow me to think about this more carefully. Anyway, right. So yeah, it was my aha moment.
That is fascinating. Like, as you pointed out, how institutions, change in institutions influence this, all this gamut, right? Like urban, gender, and, those involvement, work, even you can think about, of course, that nexus, the poverty, environment, nexus, important nexus, I would say poverty, environment, and development, right? All these three, and with the gender throwing in, and the institutional structure. So it is fascinating. Is it like a, just to follow up, become part of your, master's, thesis or something? Because you, before going to Duke, you had your master's in the Lee School of Economics, right?
Yeah. No, so this was after my master's. For my master's, actually, I got a small scholarship. Oh, that's another funny story about my master's, because I was so underprepared for it. But for my master's, I got a small scholarship. My grandparents were rural, so they were farmers from the sort of landlord farmers, but I was urban. But so I had sort of this exposure to rural issues, but really grew up urban, like I suppose many of us, right? I mean, growing up in South Asia or China, for that matter. But I had this fascination. So for my master's, I actually decided to go back to our home village and try to understand, what did poverty actually mean? So I did consumption surveys, just to understand, what did they eat? Like, if you're poor, what do you have access to in terms of just your consumption? And that was itself was also interesting. But this was my first job post-master's. So.
All right. Yeah, that's great. And now going to the Duke University, and you specialize in environmental economics. What was that? Did you expand the same topic, institutions, environment, those thing, or is it like a bit different? Just curious, from
sure. I hope all of this is of interest to your listeners. I'm just telling you my life story.
No. This is that's what we love to know. We love to know, and we in many cases, who knows? I'm sure the audience member can relate. You know, we
Yeah,
also.
well, I hope you can. But, it's interesting. I didn't come to Duke directly. So I studied and decided, and then I needed, I was, this was 30 years ago, right? I was a
Right,
little
right.
bit like as a young woman, I was a bit ahead of my social condition in India at that time. And so I needed to get out. I was very clear in my mind that I needed to leave the country
Right, right.
in order to be able to grow, intellectually and as a person. And I knew that at 22. So I
Right.
started randomly applying. And then, one didn't know sort of the Aloks of the world. One didn't know, at that point, Sakib, this is even prior to you, right? 10,
Right,
20
right, right.
prior. So I decided I needed to come to the US to study, and I sort of randomly applied without really knowing exactly, this was pre-Google. You knew nothing about
Right,
how to
right, right.
apply. There was
You
no
cannot
information.
check, verify, like the Google, as you mentioned, Google search
Yeah.
or something. Yeah.
So I ended up, there was a university, a very kind university faculty, a graduate director at the University of Northern Illinois. And I somehow got in touch with him, and then I got into the economics program in Northern Illinois, and in DeKalb, Illinois, and that's where I started. And then I got there, and I realized, like, within hours or days of getting there, I realized it just wasn't right for me. There was nothing
Right.
in DeKalb, Illinois that really made sense given my interest in environment and
Right.
everything else. It just didn't. They didn't have an environmental economics program. It was an economics hardcore. So it was my entry, and then I started looking around and made it to Duke within a couple of semesters. I reapplied. I mean, then I had access to a library. I knew what I was looking for, so I made it to Duke after that. But at Duke, it was a standard environmental economics, the environment school, which is now the Nicholas School. The economics degree was associated with the economics department over there. So it was a joint degree, and you had to do all the qualifications for the econ department. So anyway, but there I worked, it was a fantastic opportunity. Because like all graduate students, you sort of tied to your faculty, you're looking for good ideas. That's the first thing. What is it? And then if your faculty advisor is working on something, then you're able to sort of hang on to that person's coattails. And that's what I did over there. And the World Bank at that point was helping support the very first national park in Madagascar. So this was in a place called Andasibe in Madagascar. It was the very first, lemurs in Madagascar, and Duke has the highest collection of lemurs outside Madagascar anywhere in the world. So they have this whole lemur thing going at Duke. So this was the national park that they were creating, and so I went in there. But the thread continued, Sakib, in that I was deeply interested in the lives and livelihoods of the communities that were going to be affected by the national park. And they were going to be displaced, or we needed to understand what the cost was that they would bear as a result of being displaced, if they were going to be displaced. And they did a form of slash and burn agriculture. They used to call it Bavi. They did, and so they would have to stop doing the slash and burn. And so I estimated what would the costs be to the local communities. And it was interesting, having grown up in India and really being exposed to everything that was India 30 years ago. I got to Africa, and I was blown away by just the remoteness, the remoteness and the depth of poverty that I saw there. I still have this sort of striking memory. We would go from village to village, and each village, sometimes you had to walk a day to go from village to village to collect data. So it was very, you had to cross rivers holding on to things, and we'd carry in our backpacks. I don't even know if I had a laptop then, but we'd carry like some cash because people didn't have cash, and then salt and oil. because that was the thing that they didn't have. And the rest we could buy in the village and they would cook us. And I remember I dropped a spoonful of oil in a small village home, and the 4-year-old over there went crazy because I dropped a spoonful of oil.
Right.
And so that's the kind of, anyway, so that's how I got to Duke and did my dissertation on that.
Now, this is a fascinating, like I can see, like from your personal perspective, and I can, you are around that time, almost like, I can say that breaking that glass ceiling, you took that bold step, decided to pursue something that you're passionate about. You applied and you got into USA at and Northern Illinois University, and then you still, because of your curiosity, you are looking for something where you are passionate about, and you found that some sort of connection, right, with the Duke University and the research itself. I can see not only is talking about how the local communities sometimes forgotten when we go for these national projects, national park, this and that. And I can tell you, Priya, this is still, we are experiencing it, not only in South Asia, Africa, but also in USA itself, because I can tell you where I'm located now, close to Lake Superior, there's talking about policies for supporting ecotourism, sustainable tourism. Now, question is there any difference between sustainable tourism and ecotourism, number one? And number two, like if we are talking about these sort of activities, more tourists coming, whether the accessibility of the local communities will suffer, especially the minorities, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, and especially Native American community who are connected so much with the Lake Superior. So it's fascinating. I'm sure like we are all learning here. And Priya, like looking at the time, I'm just wondering if you can now touch base based on your experience, first maybe with Sandy. You served Sandy for such a long time, and I still remember my PhD thesis. The survey was funded by Sandy, and it was a great experience for me, and going to the Bangladesh coastal areas. As I mentioned, sometimes until unless you go there, you don't know. Even I was born and grew up in Bangladesh, but never went to coastal areas and talking with households. That is the main thing, understanding the people. So I'm glad that I have that kind of connection with Sandy. So if you can touch base on Sandy, and then about the Nature Conservancy, where you're working now, and the floor is yours, and thank you, Priya.
Yeah, sure. I want to make sure people have, if they have questions, I don't, and I do want to touch base on my work now, because I think that would be more relevant to all of you. But Sandy, so Sandy is the South Asian Network for Development and Environmental Economics. That's how Sakib knows me. After I finished my graduate work at Duke, I taught there for a year, and then I went on to, I wanted to get out of academia actually at that point. And I went to the MacArthur Foundation for a few years. And there I met Professor Parthasarathy, who you would all know, I think, and Professor Kalyuran Malar, who is no more, but a wonderful, wonderful scholar and a great friend. He used to be the director of the Bayer Institute of Ecological Economics in Stockholm. And the three of us together decided to try and set up an organization that was across South Asia, focused on building the strength and capacity and the learning and scholarship of young scholars in the countries across South Asia on these connections between economics and environment. So I can tell you, we started with $30,000 given by CEDA. And the institution that we created still perseveres. It, and it has, I think, has created this network of scholars across all the countries in South Asia, noting that the countries, you can't go from one to the other because of visa restrictions and conflict and misunderstandings, which prevailed. And we were as much an institution about learning and the hard thinking about economics and the environment as we were about sort of the soft social relations that we wanted. We were also peace builders amongst professionals to bring people together. I still remember Professor Inamul Haq from Bangladesh, who always used to say, if I had to meet Indians or Pakistanis, I had to go to Canada. And so we were like, why does that have to happen? We should be able to do it when we're right next door to each other. So anyway, that's the South Asian network, and it really yeah, it's been a phenomenal part of my life, and I was very grateful for that opportunity to set up and meet, hundreds of people like Sakib and build support for them in the region. And since then, I've moved, passed it on. I did it for a long time, and then gave it to, handed it over. It's in good hands now. But I want to now maybe, Sakib, if it's okay with you, I'm looking at time and I've taken too much time already talking. I want to pause now and ask if you have any questions, and then move on to some very quick slides about the Nature Conservancy. I want to share them because people don't know what the Conservancy does, I think. And so I think.
Okay. Okay, we can do that, Priya. I'll open the floor now, and you can turn your video on, maybe just quick, really introduce yourself and ask your question to Priya. Anybody, based on what Priya shared so far, her journey up to doctoral program, her research interests, and Sandy. If you have any specific question for Priya right now, I think Keshavji, you have something. Yeah.
Okay, so good morning.
Good morning. Let me see if I can see you here.
Yeah, how do I call you? Priya or
Priya?
Priya. Priya. So you have been working in a very diverse environment, and wherever we go, we have seen that the conservancy, the conservation has been emphasized by the elite groups. And around these areas, only the poor people live. I have seen very rare opportunities for those poor people for the employment. Only they would be the employer to guide in the difficult terrain, the poor people, either carrying the backpack of those visitors. Other than that, I have not seen any significant achievement or contribution from the government side. So you look at in Nepal, India. I studied in India, Dehradun, and I visited many of the national parks there. And I have seen the misery of those poor people living there.
Yeah, yeah.
So what do you think? What do you suggest to the governments of those countries?
Yeah, it's a big question that you're asking, Keshavji. It's a big question. And I don't know that we have a good answer to that. We obviously don't, because you're seeing, the evidence is that we don't. And I think there is sort of a two-pronged strategy, and I don't want to get into this because this is a lot of detail, and I'm beginning to do some work in this area. I mean, one is, the economics of it, there's just, you continue to, it's economic development, just like everything else. You have to do it. You have to do the economic development that needs to happen, and it's regional economic development. And when you have remote areas, especially, which is where a lot of some of this work happens because it's beautiful or because there are animals, then you have all the considerations of regional poverty, traps and such that you have to worry about. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is really rethinking how we want to think about conservation, rethinking who is it for whom you are doing this conservation. So it's a mind shift, I think, a little bit that you also need alongside this economic development activity. But this is a huge conversation. And so I'll just stop there, and you'll see me come back to this a little bit at the end of my TNC presentation. So if you will allow me to say that much and then get into this. Is that okay, Keshavji?
Thank you very much. You are down to the earth. And so I have heard a lot of rhetoric from the scholars everywhere, but you didn't do that. And so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. You have understood the realities of the ground.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to share some quick slides, and Sakib, just give me 10 minutes because, and if I'm
sure.
going, I'll do a hard stop at 10 minutes because I want people to ask questions. Okay?
Sure, Priya, maybe I can give you like 10 minutes. It means 9 to your time, 9:38, and we have ample time then after that for Q&A. I think that should be fine.
Do you see my slides or do you see my notes?
Your slides, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about the Nature Conservancy because I think all of you here in the US would sort of benefit from knowing the breadth of the activities we do, and we're always looking for collaborators, and some of Keshavji's questions might be answered here. Why is this not moving? Okay. So I can't do a show of hands here. So I don't know if you can do like something on your screen to show of hands to tell me if you actually know the Nature Conservancy. Do any of you know the Nature Conservancy? I know Sakib does, and people who just do a thumbs up or something on your screens if you.
Maybe thumbs up, or you can, video on, or raise your hand, whichever works.
So
thumbs up
I can see that very few people actually know the Nature Conservancy. Oh, they do actually. Some of them, Alok, of course, does. But, I think the younger people may not. And it's not surprising because most of you, I think, did not start your lives in North America. So TNC is best known. If I'd asked you, do you know WWF? You'd probably say yes. And so the Nature Conservancy started here some 70 years ago. So it's an old institution. And you have a chapter in every part of every state in the US. So if you live wherever you are, there will be a conservancy, or if you're hiking anytime, you might see a small little management area or a preserve that says managed by the Nature Conservancy. So it started as just a way to protect small pieces of land for biodiversity. But right now we do a couple of different things. We focus on climate change. And we focus on not just lands, but water, freshwater, oceans, and lands. And we've shifted away from this sort of very much environment-focused approach to an approach where I think our mission or our vision says create a world where people and nature thrive. So, trying to move, at least even though maybe it's not 100% shift, there's certainly a movement which is partly why I was hired, away from just a nature-focused organization that really tries to look both at existential threats that we now face with climate change and loss of biodiversity, but also, how do we meet the needs of the current and future generation without compromising Earth systems? So asking that question, how do we think about people and nature together? We're an organization of about, I don't know, we may be about 4,000 staff members across the globe. And we work in some 70 plus countries. In not all the countries do we have a major presence. Some of it is very small, but we've historically had a huge presence in the countries where there's a lot of biodiversity, and in the US, because that's where we started. So there's a huge presence in the US, but in Latin America, for instance, and in Indonesia. There's also a very big chapter in Australia, and we've seen tremendous growth in Africa. India is the only South Asian country where we have a chapter. And so my work now is restricted to the regions of the world where we actually work on the ground. And we do, everything. We actually do on the ground work. In the US, we own land, preserve. So we act like a land trust, less so now, but get money from donors, buy land, and set it aside for conservation. So that's a lot of the early work. We don't do as much of that work in the rest of the world, but we do, policy support, advocacy, management of actual protected areas, capacity building. So, whatever it is that is required, depending on strategic decisions that are made at the country level by the country chapters, which related to conservation. So I wanted to bring Professor Dasgupta in. He's my mentor. And, the report has been has been out there for a couple of years. And I was listening to, I don't know if any of you saw that funny video of Partha's that came out like last week in the New York Times. If you haven't, you really should see this very funny. There's a, maybe 5-10 minute video of his work for the report. It's really great. So please go find it in the New York Times. And he talks about his life's work like this, and then says that it's not going to finish. He's like, I'm probably going to be dead before it's done. So somebody's going to have to do it. And part of me thinks that organizations like ours try to do it. We're not going to be successful either. This is generational work that we are doing. So I'm going to be dead before all of it gets done. And it'll be in the hands of all of you young people. But this is sort of what we're trying to do with my job in the Conservancy. So I just wanted to tell you that I lead a small team focusing on economics and governance in the practice of conservation. And we do a couple of things. We try to understand the implications of, when I say conservation, I mean everything, climate change, all of that. I don't mean just conserving a piece of land. And trying to understand the economics of this. And a lot of it, if those of you who are economists, you know that this is our bread and butter work. We try to, what is the value of ecosystem services? So this is just the analytical piece. This is the cottage industry for environmental economists around the world. So that we do that too. But we also try to think about how to influence actions. How do you get people to behave better? How do you get them to conserve? Is it just through monetary payments for ecosystem services? We've done a lot of that. Is it through social incentives? Is it, what works? Is it education? What works? We try to see if we can answer those questions as well, where possible. And if you sort of are skeptical about this, we did a survey of about 600 staff members a few years ago at the Conservancy. And these are the types of economic instruments that are used by different staff teams across the conservancies, markets and price premiums. There's a special unit in the Conservancy that focuses on the private sector. So really finance, blended finance is a big part of it. They try to sort of pick up private sector money and support it with philanthropic dollars to see if they can bring change on the ground. Keshevji, this is partly answering your question. Offset schemes, PS, of course, and then property rights. In the US, easements are a big deal, right now. Just this morning, I was listening to NPR, and there was this whole story about Colorado River, and the infrastructure bill is going to make payments to farmers over there to reduce their use of the river because there's been a 15-year drought in this country. So how do you then, that's through easements and other instruments. And then how do you then, maybe one could, as an economist, one could use a reverse auction or something like that to figure out what the actual, to make sure public monies are used appropriately. Anyway, those types of things. And then what I wanted to point to you, the second graphic here, basically tells you how our work is different from yours as academics. So you would do the research on all these instruments, what's working, what doesn't, blah, 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 how do you design it? But what the Conservancy does is now work with governments to actually implement this, right? How do you do it on the ground? You work with individuals, you work with firms. There's a part of the Conservancy that works with firms, corporate social responsibility, work with governments. So it's the actual implementation of all of this, which matters. So I just wanted to contrast that with your own work. And then, but what are the challenges, right? What are the challenges? You would think, and part of what I had told Sakib I would do is tell you about issues that are important to us, sort of not emerging areas, but research issues that I think are important. They may not be necessarily the hottest thing in academia, but I think they're very important because of the challenges we perceive. And when we asked them what their challenges were, they were not technical challenges. I mean, there were some, of course, technical challenges. The green part, there were not even the financial challenges of implementation, which is the red part, but the institutional challenges. And for those of you who are political scientists or economists, you should be thinking about transaction costs, governance frameworks, this whole story about institutions and how they matter, which is where I started. Think about that. That's, the laws, the local institutions, implementing any of this, what matters is those institutions create existing institutions, and the need for new institutions creates barriers. So I wanted to just give you a flavor of, sort of research areas that you might be wanting to think about. Then I wanted to, Sakib, do I still have time? Then I wanted to walk you through 3 projects that I'm currently involved with or have finished, currently working on. Again, to sort of give you an idea from my perspective, where I sit with the Conservancy, what I think are emerging issues that I would love to see a lot of people working on. So one is what you see on top there is agricultural residue burning in India. This is where they burn paddy straw to move in. This is in Northwest India, the food basket of India, Punjab and Haryana, where they burn a paddy straw to move from their rice crop. They have 3 or 4 weeks, farmers burn it to go to their wheat crop. It's a two crop system in the Indo-Gangetic Plains, very, very important region for food security. And so we are working in 17 districts on the ground, sort of trying to implement farmer-based extension models to reduce this type of crop burning and figuring out alternatives. What's interesting to me in this situation right now is sort of our data, our baseline data. We have baseline data, something like 2,000 farmers, tells us that the single most important reason why farmers may burn, or statistically, the probability of burning increases by 45%. I mean, this is huge, right? Huge. If a farmer has somebody in his social network that also burns. So this issue of social networks, how do social networks matter for actions that people take, is like, it's behavioral economics, it's sociologists have been working on it for years. It's really what we saw during COVID, vaccinations, masking. It's all about these social networks. And so even in situations where people are facing economic hardship or death, social networks influence how people act. So this is an area, I think, of sort of important activity for young researchers to pick up. So I'll say that. This other piece that I'm, which is on small scale tree cover restoration. I bring this up because we're doing some work in Madhya Pradesh right now in India, but also because sort of the science, environmental sciences dominate, or the ecologists and the science, sort of the natural sciences dominate the field of environmental studies. And there's a lot of work that seems to suggest that there is a huge potential for nature-based solutions, for forests to mitigate, to be a carbon sink, and for restoration to be a opportunity to sequester carbon. And we've done a lot of work in this, and that is indeed true. But the problem is it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because of a variety of policy and institutional reasons, and because farmers face and perceive risk very differently from sort of all the global work that happens and gets published everywhere. So this idea of how do you scale these nature-based solutions when farmers and smallholders face an enormous number of risks, which are some related to nature, some not? How do you understand these risks? How do policies and regulations affect how farmers make decisions to take on certain nature-based solutions or not? So anyway, that's a set of issues that I'm very interested in, and just want to put it out there as things that you want to think about. And last, I want to draw your attention to the question that Keshavji asked, how do you, what's happening? We've done 30 years of tourism, people are not so much better off as a result of that. And so this is a set of case studies that we did, Keshavji. It's going to come out. It's not out, by the way. It's not. like this afternoon, my job is to finish this paper, and it's been accepted. So it'll come out in the next month. And we looked at where equity is a big deal, just like Sakib, you just said, all these BIPOC issues, all the big conservation organizations are wringing their hands right now, thinking, we have a history which has not been equitable. How do we integrate equity into our own work? The Conservancy now has a director of equitable conservation. It's a new position that got created last year, very strong, reports directly to sort of the leadership in the organization. And so we did this set of case studies to see where equity is being integrated into conservation. How are they actually doing it? And it's not simple, it's long, it's tedious, it takes like a specific equity lens, and it takes years. But I just wanted to tell you that just like Sakib said, this is an area where all of you young people, there's so much hard thinking that needs to happen, out of the box thinking that needs to happen. So I'd urge you to consider that. And then, again, Sakib, you need to tell me to stop.
Yeah, I guess this is your last slide, right? This is your last slide anyway, right, Priya? So we can then open the floor. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to just figure out what my chart. So, yeah, so what I wanted to say is that, working in a conservation, Alok asked me sort of, talk to us also about where you get resources and things like that. So working in a large conservation organization, the really, really exciting part for me, which Sakib, tell you the truth, we didn't really have it in Sandy, and I've sort of learned so much from it here, is access to multidisciplinary teams.
Mm-hmm.
So I know for you young scholars, you have to stay in your path to get your tenure. So stay in your path. And then I would say, once you have your tenure, like jump across and start talking to multidisciplinary teams, because the excitement really, especially on the ground, the difference is going to be made through multidisciplinary thinking. And what excites me about the work I do at the Conservancy is we have deep supply chains for impact. Often scholars, like, when you're doing research, you don't know what happens, right? It builds, believe me, it builds. So, the research adds up and then change happens. But for us, because we work with so many teams who don't do research, but who work on communication, who work on policy, who work on finance, it's really interesting to try and link our work to actual impacts on the ground. Now, access to resources, I don't have a magic bullet for you, a wand. We struggle for resources just like you do. We're constantly wringing our hands about resources. So, but what we do have access, and the way I gain resources is through collaboration. Collaborate. I work with teams who may be able to get some resources from somewhere, and then they use our research or support our research. So by myself, impossible. Together with teams, more likely. So that would be the one thing that I would say. And for us, because we get private funders, we are able to take more risks. The bad news is that it's very, MEL is limited. We don't know if our impacts are really real or not. It's just, again, because private funders, we can take risks and we don't have to be as accountable. So that's, it's very science dominated. Like when I say that, I mean the natural sciences. And that creates a huge opportunity for young scientists like you, who are social scientists, to bring your thought processes, your skills, your ideas, because that's the need. That there's, just as data science is a need, social sciences, including economics, is a need. And then the global looms over the local. And what do I mean by this? There's lots of policy decisions that are made at the global level, World Bank, Nature Conservancy, global issues. And oftentimes you run into problems because of a lack of a contextual understanding of how things play out on the ground. But you all come from parts of the world, you understand how ultimately everything is local. Obviously the global stuff really matters because global change affects all that is local as well. But given your understandings and your ability to navigate the local and the global, hold on to that. That is your unique skill. So, and you need to sort of bring that into all discussions and not just become a global person. I'm going to stop sharing. I have sort of one last slide where I talk about, I talk about tips for young scholars, but I will come back to this, but because I don't want to go on and, did I stop sharing?
Yeah, and then thank you. And thank you, Priya. And I will open the floor, if you have questions, like what I can see, the key takeaways, collaborate, as Priya was mentioning, multidisciplinary, we should work, like not only the natural science taste, but, social science fields like psychologists and all, and to understand the people, places. So that makes sense, and what Priya is suggesting also for the grant, look for collaboration. So anyway, I will open the floor and you can just, turn your video on and share and ask your question. I can see Professor Bohara has a question. Please, Professor Bohara. Yeah, you have to unmute, Professor Bohara.
Priya, very fascinating overview of very interesting topic. And I always thought this conservation and bringing in poverty and livelihood, especially in the context of institution and maybe even social construct like gender issues. I have several questions, but let me start with one example you gave about the, let's say that Kerala, I think that's where you said about this one particular product that the women were producing when the government stepped in, create some sort of institution, and suddenly the women were displaced by men. The two questions. One is, I call that like a bioeconomics, right? Where you have a product, you market it, you understand its value and you market it, and then it becomes valuable. There was one example in Calcutta about a fish. Nobody eats it because it's a very low level fish thing. But then when some scientists wrote a paper about it and showed that it had some really good quality in terms of fighting cancer, suddenly it became a very good market, and the poor people were able to take that and make earnings. So that's kind of a bioeconomics idea, I say, So in that context, do you have any other example like that where the women had a little bit of I'm not saying monopoly, but they had kind of a control over certain product, and suddenly the institution and even climate change may have shifted that market dominance from women, like women to men or something. I'm talking about the institution you said, but then climate change. Do you have any example or anything about that?
I have to think about that, Alok. So you're saying where there is no deliberate government action, but because of climate change,
yes,
something might have shifted as a result of. I feel like at the back of my mind I have something, but it's not. It doesn't come to the top right now. So let me think about that. I feel like there's an example lingering over there, but maybe we can see if there are other questions, and maybe I'll see if it comes back to me. But that's not. I'm trying to think. That's not an obvious. Yeah.
That's fine, Priya. You can think about it later. But what do you think of this? I really like the idea of that social network issue. That's one of my sort of a research interest been lately in that area. But what do you think of this bioeconomics concept where all this product I don't know, you can call it exotic or whatever, right? Forest product, traditional food or product that hasn't gotten much attention because people don't know any science behind it, right? Nutritional value and so on. Suddenly, once you understand that, it suddenly becomes very valuable. Is there any sort of potential along that line where it might benefit a lot of people who perhaps who depend on the forest product may have a better knowledge about it and better access, and they have a better tradition?
I mean, there's all these examples, right? They're limited, but there are, acai in Peru, even avocado in Bolivia, and then this particular NTFP in Cameroon, what is it called? It's very popular, which has had a huge impact on communities and their lives because, the market opened for them. And then the only problem is that those examples, the value addition is still very limited. There's a lot of things that need to align. For example, refrigeration, transportation for the market to really scale for some of these products. So you have to have the whole value chain has to develop. And if the value chain doesn't develop, then you're not going to be able to, you're going to be able to market, but you're not going to be able to scale. So so a lot of in the Conservancy, actually sort of this market, the investment and the finance part of the Conservancy, it used to be called Nature West. I think it has a different name. So they actually do that kind of work. They bring in private sector investments to develop value chains where they think it's feasible to develop value chains, and where there are market opportunities. So that part, I think there are opportunities, but you need to bring money to those opportunities for them to grow. And the other part of that is then you need to actually worry about the people that you might leave behind as a consequence, because there are always, maybe there's some traditional users of that fish, right? So then the fish gets marketed, and what happens to the people who are eating that fish? They go hungry. So, you really have to worry about those people. So I think that's the two-part story that I was also trying to say to Keshavji. So
thank you.
And that's Shamrat. I think you have a question, right, Samrat?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Priya. My name is Samrat Kaur, and I am currently an assistant professor of economics at St. John's University in Minnesota. And thank you for sharing your story. So I wanted to ask, right, so as a faculty member in a liberal arts college, how can academic institutions like ours based collaborate with Nature Conservancy? Like, how can our students participate at TNC? How can we as faculty, are there any grant or research opportunities that we can get with TNC?
Yeah.
If you could talk about that.
Yeah, sure. I think this would be relevant. We don't make grants. We're not like the World Bank and place. We don't make grants usually. And we don't use a lot of consultants either, but we work with research scientists and faculty all the time. We do that all the time. In Minnesota, the first thing that I would suggest, because you have students in Minnesota and you work in Minnesota, the first thing I would suggest is try to find out, there's a huge chapter in Minnesota of the Nature Conservancy. They do a lot of good work. So I would just collaborate, just cold call. I mean, this is one of the things, or use my name. Priya said, if you find somebody, like I met with Priya Shyamsundar, blah, blah, and try to cold call somebody and see if you can get a meeting with them and see if, find out what they're doing, look at their website, then find the right people, find out what they're doing, and see if you can offer them something as an initial collaboration. We don't offer a lot of internships because internships at TNC need to be paid. We don't do unpaid internships. That means we have to raise money even for internships. So we never have the time. And the thing you have to realize, people are incredibly busy. They're completely overworked, incredibly busy. So find somebody where your interest, and then be bold and try to offer them something that they might need, right? And build that relationship. Once that relationship is built, then you can think about more, collaborative things. But that relationship building, you have to invest in it. It's not easy. You absolutely have to invest in relationship building. And that's the one thing that I will tell all of you young people, invest in relationship building. Those social networks, like Sakib and I, 15 years, right? I haven't seen him. It's the one thing that your schools may not tell you, invest in social networks.
And thank you, Priya. That's a very good advice. And I can see Keshavji raised his hand. Keshavji, please.
Thank you. Again, you suggested me to call Priyaji, and so I'll call Priyaji. Thank you very much for sharing so many nice stories. You also mentioned about the ecosystem services. There are conditions in Nepal and India, and also in Bangladesh, and where people living in the upper catchment areas, and the life of the livelihood of the lower catchment areas is depending on the upper catchment area. For example, the Churia Bhavar areas and also the Shivalik areas. So it has been so difficult. And in my book, I wrote that the people living in the lower catchment area, they pay revenue. At least 1% of their revenue should be invested to conserve the mountain area, the fragile mountain areas in the Churia and the Shivalik range. It has been very difficult to convince the politicians, the parliamentarian and the political representative to implement that. And I wonder if you have come across any example of the ecosystem services and where the upper catchment and the lower catchment area, and let's forget about the hydropower usage between India and Nepal, and that is also a part of the ecosystem services. That is a large scale one. So
Yes,
are there
yes.
any? Yeah, are there any small scale examples that you have come
Yes.
across? You have the world in your mind, and
Yes,
can you
yes.
suggest something, please? Yeah.
Yes, this is actually in some ways a semi-success story for TNC. They're called water funds. And if you Google the Nature Conservancy water funds, I'm sure there's a ton out there. I think they may have 40 to 60 maybe at this point, water funds around the world. Not so much in India and Nepal. I think the first one is being set up. So what they do is they create, like, they do some analysis on the ecosystem services, upper, source water protection. So if you grow trees where the source water is, what happens to the water quality and the water quantity. So they use these hydrological models to estimate these changes that might happen to water quantity and water quality, especially in areas where the water feeds into a city. So there's a Nairobi water fund, for example. There's one in, I think there may be one or two in South Africa. There are several across Latin America. There's one in Minnesota, by the way, I think. And so they create, it starts with the sort of the modeling of the water and what needs to happen at the upper catchment area in order for the water streams to be improved. And then they look at the cost of doing all of that. And then they create an institution. It's usually some sort of a trust fund that's created with government, private sector, others involved, and try to finance basically build up the financing so that they can do whatever the restoration it is that has to happen in the upper catchment areas, so that the water costs of cleaning the water when it flows into cities is lower. So this is, classic use of economic instruments, but in a way that it's implemented. So it's different, right? It's the institutions all change, but there's many examples of that. Huge amount of work in Africa, in Kenya, which I know a little bit better, working with hundreds of communities to do terracing, to create what they call water pans, just waters, ways of storing water, things like that, so it infiltrates. So there's a lot of work in this area. I'm trying to be fast because I know I've run out of time, Sakib. So I want to make sure if any of the other colleagues have questions, I can stay for a few more minutes, but.
Now, what I'm thinking, maybe Priya, like as you pointed out, if you are fine, we can stay for a few minutes, and if somebody has any pressing question. But for the sake of time, what I'm thinking, maybe I'll give floor to Professor Bohara to make closing remarks, and after that, those who have no commitment. If it's okay, Priya, and if you
yes, it's okay.
Maybe extra 10 minutes, maybe after that. But I want to make sure the people who have things to do, So I will ask Professor Bohara, for the closing remarks, and then we can stay. Those who want to stay. Okay, to Professor Bohara.
Thank you very much, Priya. It was great to see you after a long time. As you said, the importance of network. And so that about 15 years ago, maybe, that's what you said. And this Feed the Mind program that Nepal Center and the Himalayan Policy Research Consortium that we have built over the last 17, 18 years is to just do that, which is to develop network among the scholars with interest in, a variety of development and other economic issues plaguing the perhaps developing world. So I think it's a great pleasure to have you. And I'm sure that many of us, at least I learned quite a bit. And I'm already thinking about some research project that I want to start with at UNM. So it's been a great benefit to me personally, I'm sure many others. And I think your story to go from one thing I got was your interest in economics that began with thinking about some product in Kerala, and then interest in Lemur in Madagascar, and you ending up in Duke to get a PhD and moving on to tackle all these exciting issues related to environment and development. And we learned quite a bit in terms of your message, which is think outside the box, which is great, because once you get tenure, as you said, a young scholar have to start reaching out to scholar from other disciplines. That's a great advice. And also not to be shy and just making cold call, and also to bring something from on behalf of yourself, right? Anytime you reach out for collaboration and resources and whatever the funding opportunity is, you have to also bring something to the table. So I think that's a great advice. And particularly some of the issues you talked about, institution. A lot of time we economists in mainstream, as you said, we get the data, run models and publish and all that. We pay very little attention. So that's one of the reasons we were interested to hear from you, that how the academic, hard work or quantitative work can be blended with the policy and the real world issues that you have been dealing with over the last 20 years or plus. So mixing the two sort of institutions as well as, like a traditional economic way of modeling and so on, blending the two and making it a part of a research project. I think that was a very good advice. So overall, thank you very much, Priya, and hope to connect again in the future so that you can share your wisdom and some of the exciting project, especially, this was a very overview about your conservation and your work, but we also would love to hear your research presentation, perhaps in one of our annual conferences that we do every December. And we also would like to let you know that every summer in July, we have a graduate panel, as well as this type of Feed the Mind, where we bring people like you and kind of have you share your thoughts and knowledge and experience. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. And yeah, no, that's great. As long as it's useful, it's really worth doing. And so, Sakib, I'm happy to stay. I really want to hear all of these younger people. I want to hear what you have to say. And Amjad, I saw your question. And Alok, we'll stay in touch. So, yeah, we'll think. Sakib,
yeah, thank you, Priya.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Priya, for staying some extra minutes here. And you can start with then Amjad's question. And Amjad, if you are fine, you can turn the video on. That's okay. If you're okay with that. But otherwise, we can. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, Amjad. Yeah, I think you're muted, Amjad. Is it? Can you check your microphone? Otherwise, we can read the question on behalf of you. Or Priya can see, of course. Yeah,
I can see the question, Amjad, but can you? You're not able to speak. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Maybe Priya, you can address Amjad's question.
Yeah, he's not. No, I'd really, Amjad, if you're not able to speak because we can't hear you, just tell me who you are, like what you're doing right now, so I can.
Oh yeah, Amjad, can you type it in the chat area? Yeah, thank you, Amjad.
So, this is a hard question. Does conservation really benefit local communities economically? So this is like the fundamental issue that we're working on, and I have been thinking about, and a lot of people are thinking, and there's a couple of, and there's projects that the Conservancy works on around the world where we try our very best to make that happen. In fact, as there is this, there's a whole department in the Conservancy which is called community, what is it called? Community-led conservation. I can't remember, something along those lines. So, remember in my times, the idea was it's community-based conservation. So you really work to help communities. But now the idea is evolved from that and to be thinking about community-led conservation. What do communities want in terms of their own economic development? And then let's start from there versus saying, what can we offer communities? Because sometimes what we want to offer isn't that they want. So there's a lot of work happening. We have a long 10-year projects in around the world, Mongolia, British Columbia, Kenya, Peru, many where there's sort of this 10-year effort to try and to do exactly what. And so is it completely successful? I don't know the answer to your question. Is there an effort to make it successful? Absolutely. Is it successful in some parts of the world? I think so. For the work, in fact, the work I think that we're doing in the border of the US, Canada, so it's Alaska, British Columbia, the state of Washington. There's a whole region there where we're working with indigenous communities. And I think that region is particularly successful. They brought a lot of finances to bear and allowed communities, or not allowed, invited communities to lead that effort. And I think that's very, very successful over there. I think you see less success in poorer countries. I think you see more success in our own work in Australia, and the US and Canada. I think partly that's because we bring a lot of financing. It's easier to bring financing there. There is, my hunch is, and I don't know, there's not a proper, I can't say this based on an evaluation, but my hunch is that it's a bigger struggle, say in Kenya with the community conservancies. There's a lot of work we do with community conservancies in Kenya, for instance, or with community fisheries in Peru than it is in Australia and in the US. And there's a struggle here too. I don't mean to diminish it, but that's my short answer. Good, Amjad. Good to hear that you're a Sandy grantee.
Looks like he met you in China. Look, he met you in China, and it's one of the Sandy R&T. Maybe you were there, Priya, and Amjad is also there. So it's a small world. And by the way, to everybody who are from joining from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, I just want to let you know that we have the graduate student panel in summer and annual HPRC conference in early December. You can present your work and also your students. You can encourage your students, especially for the summer one and the annual HPRC conference as well. And good thing is, as Professor Bohara mentioned, we are multidisciplinary. So we have folks presenting from different fields. So this is a very good platform, what Priya also said, not only within our group, but also, trying to go and check with others, like making cold calls if necessary, if you have any connection, and starting that, building that relationship, as Priya was mentioning. So again, I will ask anybody if you have any question, because Priya loves to, share her thoughts, anything that you want to.
Yeah, I mean, feel free. It doesn't have to be technical. It could be just a career-related thing, anything. But and if you don't, that's okay too.
Like maybe Shoresh, Christina, Hari, if you have any question. And Samrat, if you have another question, I can see that you.
Yeah, if no one wants, I can ask.
Yeah, please go ahead. And Christina, maybe I can see now.
Samrat, let's see if anybody. Sometimes you have to give them.
Or maybe Chris, if Samrat, okay, we start with Christina and then. Okay,
yeah, of course.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Christina.
Yes, hi there. So
Christina.
I'm a colleague of Alok. I'm actually a senior lecturer in the Department of Economics with him. And so I have my doctorate. I don't have a question, but so sorry about that. I kind of snuck in. But I just wanted to, thank you for sharing your experiences with us because, especially in the very beginning when you're talking about your aha moment about, why you got interested in this. And I think it reminds us all that it's the real world challenges that inspire us to do what we want to do. And so I just wanted to thank you for that and to let you know that I'm already thinking of ways to include resources from the Nature Conservancy to include in my courses to get undergraduates inspired. So I just wanted to thank you for that and for sharing your experiences.
Great.
And thank you, Christina. And maybe Samrat, your question.
Well, okay, yeah. No, I was just wondering, Priya, right? So are there any recent projects that Nature Conservancy is doing that you are really excited about or that has a potential to significantly impact environmental policy making? What are some?
So I just got some grant money to work. It's just very, very beginning stages. We're looking at climate risk and vulnerability in Kenya, in Colombia, and maybe the Dominican Republic. And my boss, who's the chief scientist, is a climate scientist, Catherine Heo. So it's a very big deal. But these countries now, for example, in Kenya, there are all these community conservancies that we're putting a lot of support to. They run the conservation work there. But we know that they face climate risks. So we are bringing in so much support for thinking 10 years, right? We have a 10-year plan but we also want to make sure we understand what the climate risks are that they're likely to face. So all these investments shouldn't go down the drain because something changes in 10 years. So there's a colleague of mine who will be working on downscaled climate models to really, like the climate scientists, there'll be some climate science. But we understand also, we want to really understand how communities are vulnerable, right? And they don't just face climate hazards, they face any number of other hazards. So how do we think about vulnerability, and then how does that overlay with the climate vulnerability? Think about vulnerability broadly. So that's another part of it. And then the third part of the work is to try and understand, like, how do communities themselves perceive risk? There's the objective hazard and risk estimation, and then there's the community perception of risk. And Sakib, I have a colleague who's just telling me that Mitch Carson has a survey instrument, a new survey instrument that he's testing out that tries to look at multiple risks and then scale it down to sort of how different risks are perceived. So I'm excited to try and use this instrument. So how do they, and then what types of adaptation are they actually already undertaking, because they're already doing. So trying to do the very local work. And then we want to combine all of this into making the business case for some adaptation investment. So then there'll be the economic analysis of what the costs and benefits are of whatever the investment is. So it's interesting to me because we're combining different disciplines and then having a very practical outcome associated with it. So it's not started as yet. So, but it's in multiple countries, so it'll be very different in each country. So that makes it very interesting. So that's one area of work. But I'm also very excited. We're working in Madhya Pradesh in India and to look at agroforestry, because India has an agroforestry policy, but agroforestry is not scaling at all over there. And we understand that there are regulations, which are really institutions, right? Regulations that stop farmers from planting trees, because once it's interesting there, the agriculture ministry says, okay, farmers, here's some incentives, plant trees. And then the trees grow, and then the forest department says, stop, you can't sell these trees, So there's these institutional reasons why the whole thing is stymied. And so what we want to do there is more sort of economics to try to see, actually one of my Sandy colleagues is working with us over here to see if we can maybe implement some framed reverse auctions to see what the transaction costs there are, but also to try and understand adoption behaviors. But the multidisciplinary part of this is so exciting to me too, because we're looking at data, like remote sense data from 20 years, right? So it's 2022 to 2000 or something like that, to look at areas where croplands have converted to trees. So we're starting with that information. So looking at remote sensing data to identify our sample of farmers. Where are we going to go? We're going to go to those regions where there actually has been. So again, combining sort of these multidisciplinary tools has been fun. So anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Priya, one thing, maybe I just touch base with you here. Maybe you mentioned Mitch Coons, right? Mitch Carson, sorry.
Carson.
Okay. Maybe if in the chat area, if it is okay, if you can type the name so that our, all of us can check that his risk assessment.
That big book, that survey methods book.
Okay. You're talking about that
Carson.
one. Okay.
Yeah, Carson of, I don't know, I can't remember what is Carson of Michelle and Carson.
Okay. Yeah, we can then find out. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. With the last
and
name.
The other book I'm reading, which is very interesting to me, is Change by Damon Santola. That's the one on networks. So I would definitely urge you to
Change by Santola, right? Okay, Change by Santola.
It's a blockbuster right now by Damon.
Okay. I will get hold of it. I think whoever is here now, this information, the Santola Change, and the other one you mentioned, reverse auction, right? Maybe people can also look at the literature.
That's for identifying transaction costs. We're trying to see. We're still
right. Now this is interesting how reverse auction could be applied for this conservation and adaptation, to identify the adaptation strategies or adoption strategies, right? Adoption of those mitigation and other conservation strategies. So anyway, Mandy, you have a question?
Yeah, I actually just want to really appreciate the at the beginning sharing with all your life stories. Like, I feel it's very inspiring. And for me, one of my part of the job is advising my students. I feel a lot of time it worked so well when I start sharing my own feelings about like the research about why I'm interested in economics, things like that. But for me, I also feel like when I'm advising, mentoring others, I also want to learn more from senior researchers like you, who really actually, for me, I view this like our interest in poverty in developing countries, in all the social economic issues. A lot of time we are doing some kind of mission work here. Is like we actually have this kind of social conflicts about, like, should we go to some jobs with more better payment or things like that, but we are really spend your life working on those big problems and research problems. Like, I just want to hear from you about how you view that. Like, when I try to convince my students, like, try to work on the developing issues, but I also need some kind of encouragement, like this encouragement words from you. Like, can you also share something with us?
Tell me exactly, like, about how to keep myself motivated, or how to focus on developing.
Like things like that. Is like, for I do have a lot of students come up to me saying, like, I have the heart to change the world, but at the same time, I need to think about my life, like how I survive in high cost of living areas, things like that. But my goal, my purpose here is definitely hear from you about how you keep on working with, like, all these great projects with your own time management, life management, all the things, like as like, I just feel like I want to hear some encouragement here.
I mean, I can tell you, I've taken a lot of risks because I didn't take a traditional academic path, right? I took a lot of risks. I've jumped around But I've certainly followed my passion. That's for sure. I've like never lost track of my passion. I certainly followed that. But I also had a very supportive spouse. And that really, I mean, and I supported him too. I went, there was a time where I took care of the kids a bit more, and he was traveling a lot more than and then especially, and then in the later years, he downscaled his work, and then my work scaled up. So, we definitely traded off, but I was able to take some financial risks because I worked, without thinking very carefully. For example, when I set up Sandy, I didn't create a business plan for it. If somebody had made a business plan for it, they would have said, it's not gonna, there's no return on this. Don't do it, right? I didn't do that. I just sort of decided that that's what I want. But because I was financially able to lean on my husband. So that's the one thing that is really important. So if you have a partner whom you can financially lean on, I have to say, without that, it would have been harder for me to take the financial risks, which I did absolutely take in order to follow my passion. So that's one thing that is very clear. You have to tell your students to take care of their finances first, either through a partner or through their savings or whatever it is. But beyond that, especially now, there's a lot of opportunities for people, right? I mean, it's not like, the labor market is quite strong. There are a lot of opportunities. And especially for young people, I think you should ask them to take risks, right? I mean, they should. It's like, what's the point? Like, I'm almost at the end of my career now, and I'm like, it happens very fast. So if you haven't taken those risks when you're young, it's hard to take them as you get older. So you should say, just, send them all out of the US and let them go to Papua New Guinea and, wherever it is, let them go live for a few years outside. You should send them all out. And let them take all those risks, and then they'll still have plenty of years to make money and build a reasonable life. I would say, yeah. So
thank you so much. I think this is the thing. I need to hear people saying that, and I can pass the words out.
Absolutely.
Because it's not just me. I'm like still like a junior faculty right now, but hearing from you is definitely very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And thank you, Priya. This is very fascinating. And you can see, like, we have people here who can spend whole day with you, with the questions and stuff. So now, I just looking at the time, maybe we can do one thing. Maybe Priya, you can let Mandy or the group there who contacted you while organizing this, your email, if it is okay, if we can forward it to our group, so that if some questions they want to have, and we want to, of course, as Professor Bohara mentioned, we want to be in touch with you, and maybe some of the projects that you're doing, if you are thinking like, okay, maybe if you are busy, maybe your co-author can present to one of our conference, so that we can learn, and of course we want to be in touch with you. And again, I want to thank everybody, because I was looking at the time and I have to hop out, Priya, as well.
I have to go. Too.
So I want to thank you and all those advices that you have given us. And of course, this is actually recorded, as Mandy was mentioning. And we will. I think I will tell people, please check this out. Those who couldn't attend today, because you can learn many life skills. And especially last question from Mandy is very important for our colleagues, female colleagues especially. So anyway, thank you, Priya.
Bye, guys. Good luck.
All right.
Bye.